Hello and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Simon Hodgkins, and I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Tracy Hedrick. Tracy is the Chief Marketing Officer and Senior Associate Athletic Director for Ohio State Athletics and Business Advancement. Tracy is really a powerhouse brand specialist, storyteller, a global marketing executive, and she's got over 2 decades of experience in entertainment and, of course, sports. So, from building inclusive fan experiences to mentoring high impact teams, Tracy's going to bring, some visionary lens to this discussion. And of course, she brings it to all the arenas that she works in. But, Tracy, you're very welcome to Vista Talks today.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure. I'm going to jump straight in because we've got a lot to cover, Tracy. Now, I mentioned your career, it spans everything from college athletics, entertainment, live events, international hospitality. Can you just walk us through a little bit about that journey for our worldwide audience? Is there a common thread that's guided you through this sort of dynamic industry landscape?
Well, I think it's fair to say ever since I was a child, I have always been motivated to create experiences for people. So, whether it was, you know, playing library, office, travel agent for my family growing up, which I know a lot of, people can relate to in that space, and also as I got older, creating those mixtapes to, pass out to friends and just really making sure that people were getting experiences that they may not have been exposed to. And so I found, great joy in that. And through college, it continued where I was with my group of, college, friends, and we would also create experiences on campus by putting together concerts for our campus community, and which really catapulted into how I got into the live music space, which I have been part of my entire career, and just different facets of that. You noted that I had worked internationally with in hospitality, and of course leading to sports. And so for me, that common thread is really just being part of something greater of what I call the memory making business. And it all is tied together through relationships and senior leaders, and that support that has always been given to me to be innovative, to focus on, promoting and telling the story. And ultimately that to me personally is that common thread.
I love that. I love the memory making business. That's gone right in, Tracy. I love that. And look, I mean, I appreciate the context, but I want to ask you, I mean, obviously, as well as the CMO and a senior associate athletic director with Ohio State Athletics, you're shaping these fan experiences that I mentioned, right? It's probably one of the most iconic sports institutions in the world. What does it actually take to craft a brand that wins that lifelong loyalty across generations, that creates those sort of long lasting memories? How do you go about creating that experience?
Well, every day I wake up and I am honored to be a steward of this great brand, and it really takes a full team um, that I work with every day that is very passionate of telling the story, making sure that Ohio State athletics shows up as its best self. And it's in a lot of different places, and we have so many touch points. I refer to our fan base, which a lot of people do, as Buckeye Nation, and define that as anyone who has some type of infinity for Ohio State. And there's a lot of different groups that are affiliated, with Ohio State. It could be an alumni, it could be a current student athlete, a former student athlete, it could be a staff member, it could be, someone who grew up, watching Ohio State with their grandparents, right? So there's just so many different people within Buckeye Nation that we're communicating with, and we're very well aware of all of these different touch points that we can have with people. And often it's just listening to the stories, right? And hearing what people's experiences are. And that's really important in what we do each and every day, is to ensure that we are the stewards of that brand.
I really like that. And it's obviously a wide community, a diverse community across whether it's age or cultures or experiences or touch points that they've had with a brand at some point in their lives. And I want to ask you, as a storyteller and as a strategist, is there anything in your view that makes a really good brand story? And are you having to make sure that you do that sort of authentically, is a word we use a lot today,
Mhm.
isn't it? That it's coming across and reaching that diverse and that evolving audience who have a lot of distractions with all the sort of tech and things that are going on in our busy lives today. What makes that good brand story today, Tracy?
I believe it's showing up consistently, and that brand, I always share, it's what is that emotion? Like when you see that logo, like what does what does that resonate inside of you? And I think as a storyteller, that's really just very the core of what we do every day. And it's important that we continue, telling that story. We have the traditions, that people have embraced and care about, but we also work in a space and are supported in innovation and what's next. So we want to also keep evolving as brand strategists in this space.
Yeah, and it's interesting in the world of AI and the AI frenzy that we hear about today, to talk about things like tradition and experience and emotion as well. It's such a human trait, isn't it? We're bound by our traditions and our backgrounds and our experiences, and that emotional connection that you can have with a brand when you see or experience the
Mhm.
brand. What does that conjure up? It's obvious that you invest heavily in getting that brand positioning right, that brand story, that emotional connection that goes on through generations in your world, doesn't it, Tracy?
It certainly does. It
Yeah.
really does. And
Um,
I've learned to, even, outside of Ohio State and throughout my career, it's, the brands and, being able to work with a great global brand like the Hard Rock, in hotel and casino, and which I spent time in Punta Cana. It's, people have had either touch points, with a brand, or they're new to it. And it's really important that we continue to create those positive memories that are going to carry on. And when they see that brand, even if it's their first time, they're going to remember it and having that great positive experience. And so for me, personally, it's it's awesome. It's really cool to see how that brand will carry on.
yeah, and I was going to ask you a little bit about your work with the Hard Rock Cafe as well, because you've worked with a lot of big names in live entertainment. You mentioned the Hard Rock Cafe. You're talking about world-renowned artists like Yanni and others, and those experiences must also teach you a lot. Because I know it sounds very glamorous on one side. I got to be honest, it sounds really exciting and cool, but you've got to work a lot in terms of leadership skills to get things done in that role. There's a lot of pressure too that people don't often see. And you've also still got to make sure you're creating those sort of moments that matter, right? How does that work in that sort of live entertainment space, you know, or even the audience and fan experience space today.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, from my experience, working with um, Yanni's tours, it was wonderful and refreshing to learn about the fans. When you really learn and dig down to the core of why they are buying tickets. Why are they buying the music, and engaging those experiences for me on the international stage, with Yanni, particularly being that he, is a musician, and really that music was, that he has is so global, and it's very inclusive to everyone, and there's not a lot of lyrics, right? So it can just be enjoyed, right? And you don't have to wonder, what's being said, and like I maybe don't speak that language, and so talking to the fans and learning that they might have had a challenging part of their life, and that music was inspirational. It just really creates for me, even making memories for my own self, right? So, as much as I, want the fans to have those memories, I'm, also able to really engage and process what they have to say, which makes my work rewarding at the end of the day.
Yeah, 100%. And look, I don't know how you do it all, but I wanted to also mention you're not just leading the marketing for Ohio State athletics, but also is it Case, which includes sort of like the nationwide arena, um, the Scott Stein Center. Am I
Yes, we
pronouncing
have
that right?
it's so we also on that side of the world in Columbus, Ohio. We're Case Columbus Arena Sports and Entertainment, and so we also manage two arenas, which are within 5 miles apart. Um, we have a team that handles the booking, and then I'm part of our marketing team who also works on the outward marketing for those venues. There's also a theater called Mershon Auditorium, which is on the Ohio State campus, in addition to the iconic Ohio Stadium, which we also produce events there as well.
And Tracy, how are you actually balancing that commercial strategy with that community connection? Because they all have a community around them. Everything that you've mentioned there, they're high profile spaces. So how are you balancing that commercial strategy with the community connection piece?
We have an amazing team. My coworkers are also diligent. They're also out there as a steward of our brand, and we say that Columbus is a must play market, and we do have a lot of great programming that's going on, and I think that's important for a community to have the accessibility to so many wonderful events that's taking place in the community. And even if it's not a concert or a family event or sport, our facilities are community assets as well. So there's, this is graduation season. So many of the local schools have, graduations. There's, also other engagements that, take place throughout the year. It could be, a corporations hosting like their annual sales event, for their teams and staff. So there's always something happening within the community. So I think just offering that portfolio of diverse programming is great for the community.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And obviously, on the flip side of that, to some degree, is one of the things that I know you hold dear. One of your sort of philosophies is that you don't like to accept the term "we've always done it this way" or "it's always been done that way." And I want to ask you, how do you foster innovation inside, say, a large traditional institution, especially in the industries that we're talking about here, where to some degree maybe legacy defines the culture?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really great question because there is those traditions that exist. However, it's, part of our evolution, within our industries because the industries are always changing. And so we have to be nimble and able to adapt to those changes. And it's part of a mindset, right? Of what's to come, what have all these wonderful, you know, um, engagements that have happened to this point. That's been like our foundation. But as leaders, it's like, how are we going to get to that next step? And then those that will come after us, what will they do? And so, um, we see often, the innovation of, technology, what are those offerings that you see like in an arena space, like what's available. Who would have ever thought that there would be an app one day, right, for all industries. Yeah, I go to a hotel, there's an app, and there's just great ideas that are just being adapted across the board, and we just continue to evolve in those spaces and what we're giving in those experiences. And it's also, again, it's a team effort, so you can have your marketing and comms, and I always use this as a illustration of from that marketing experience, like we're getting people, it's part of their journey, so they get to a venue, and then it's passing off that to our event management team, and those who are there at the facilities day to day, to ensure that we're providing these elite experiences for our fans when they get there. So we're lockstep within our organization. It takes everybody to really pull off these incredible moments so our fans can enjoy, and then they want to come back to your venue again too, right? Because they've had the greatest experience, whether if they had the best you know hot dog, fries, pretzels ever, which we hear all the time. People, they want to come and they want to have a pretzel, like, that's great. So it's just part of those experiences. It's getting the t-shirt, making that available to people. And it's that whole journey of making the memory. And I often I talk about how that could be someone's like first concert. I've known people who've gotten engaged at sporting events, birthday parties. It could be a kid's first time at a baseball game with grandparents. So everyone is just engaging differently, but all in the same space,
Yeah, I
especially
mean,
when in live events. Yeah.
yeah, it's fantastic to hear you say that because you're truly making those memories, those live experiences, those sort of touch points with the brand. And also really interesting to see how the brand doesn't just start here at the marketing side. It filters through to real on the ground touch points and experiences. So it goes right through, as you say, with that team, with that experience, whether it's a pretzel or an experience or a wedding proposal, whatever it is. And also the two words that sort of came out when we started talking about this was, being able to evolve and being able to adapt. And that seems very central to this. So even though you're doing all those wonderful, almost human aspects and emotional connections and touch points with the brand, you also recognize that it's important that you adapt and evolve and constantly look to get better. So thank you for sharing that, Tracy.
Mhm.
It does bring me on to something I must ask, because the audiences that we're describing, they're very different and diverse. And we have multicultural marketing, we have language differences, we have cultural differences. So when it comes to inclusive campaign design or inclusive marketing, these sort of important areas, has there been any lessons that you've had to learn about building messages that reflect these different communities that you're serving at all these different areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think I could, use, example when I was, at Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Punta Cana, and part of my role was, working, with our teams, that were there at the hotel, and doing more of the internal marketing. So when people were actually, at the hotel and being with a wonderful brand, as Hard Rock is, um, those who, have experienced Hard Rock, whether it's a hotel or it could be casino or cafe, there's the memorabilia, right? And one thing that I really truly appreciated, with my experience is that, Hard Rock incorporated, um, artists that were from the area, from the Dominican Republic. So it also embraced, the culture that was there. And so that was really, meaningful to our teams and staffs, as we were, launching that brand experience there in Punta Cana, and it was, helpful for even the staff, who many had, not traveled or had touch points, with the Hard Rock brand. And it really just showed how, inclusive, Hard Rock is, and really making those connections. So it wasn't just like, hey, this is, you know, the Hard Rock, where it originated, from London, and then this is here. This is what that experience is. But no, it was really taking accountability of those immersive experiences, because if people are, traveling to, Punta Cana, and they want to have that experience, like, it was just all very engaging. And so I also was able to work on, hotel playlists that had, artists, again, from the Dominican Republic, South America, and just all over, right? More of a global list of what that experience was at the hotel. So, which was really, wonderful, having that ability to really work through, um, our, great team that we had, on the ground there in those experiences.
Yeah, and it illustrates, doesn't it, the importance of connecting locally with the area, with the culture, with the language, etc. And obviously, you're able to tie that in with that hard rock experience, right? Because
Mhm.
people have different touch points, but obviously the local resonance really helps there, doesn't it? And I wanted to maybe move on a bit to the sort of, whether it's the Ohio Stadium, whether it's the international stages, the venues we've talked about, live events ultimately they're emotional touch points to some degree. And have you learned anything along the way about how marketing helps you to deepen those emotional connections? How do you make somebody feel personal when you're looking at things like the scale that you're working at, Tracy?
Yeah, I think, there's, often there's the research that, goes into, artists, and, the venues that you're in, the communities, if it's globally, locally. Of course, locally, you feel like you're a little bit more in tune, right? But there is, the research that needs to be done. It's not, a one size fits all, scenario. And so, as leaders, we have to be able to engage and talk to people, um, see what those communities are saying and how you're going to interact with them. Because if you have, an artist like, Yanni, who's traveling globally, um, the media, what does the media touch points look like in those countries? How are people getting their information? So, really, as a great storyteller, we have to make sure we're telling people those stories. And often, it could be through visual media, it can be through written media, but just ensuring that we are telling the story and making sure, people can get there. Because the last thing you want to hear someone say is, well, I didn't know that that artist was in town or that game was that day. And it's like, how can we continue to push ourselves to make sure that we are closing any gap of communication within our storytelling?
Yeah, no, I get that. And I think, that's such an important aspect of what we're talking about here today. And another important aspect as well that I want to raise, because obviously you're trailblazing in what you do and all the different areas that you're doing it in, and the venues and the communities, etc., that you're involved in. But there's been a history, I suppose, maybe if I can say, of sort of male domination in these sort of industries, maybe historically a little bit. Is there any advice that you've got for leaders, emerging leaders who want to actually lead, with strength, authenticity in this sort of industry, in this sort of work, or just for emerging leaders in general?
Well, throughout my career, I have certainly been surrounded by wonderful senior leadership that I believe that have believed in me and myself personally. I've always shown up as my true, authentic self. Ever since I started my career, always willing to be innovative, try something new. Some of the greatest advice I got when I started in entertainment was to learn everything, even though I was in more of a PR space. But I, spent time with the ticketing office, and I was out with our facilities team, event management, our guest services, VIP experiences, and just learning like what my colleagues like what their day to day was like. So that way I could really strengthen my communication, with those areas to be much more of a team player, in those spaces. So I also think that it's important for, anyone, not just the, sports and entertainment, but just, business wise, to have a mentor and, find a really good mentor. I can't imagine someone declining mentorship, right? If someone, reaches out and there's, colleagues that if someone has, those are always, great starting points. And now with the global community like LinkedIn, right? You find people, right? And if there's someone through their networking, I think that's really important part of that process. And also, I think it's very important for just people, in general to say, what are they interested in? Like where, set some of those career goals. What's their North Star, right? At the end of the day, what's your North Star? Where do you see yourself? And really, create a plan to get there. And who are those people along the way that can assist?
Yeah, so important, and of course mentorship as well, being helpful, and being surrounded by a good leadership team as well helps. Some people aren't in that scenario, so what you're sharing there really helps people. And I've got to come back to the AI question because everybody's talking about it, and I want to ask it from a media buying perspective, if I can, because obviously, um, have in your world, have you seen the advertising and the audience engagement? Is it evolving? Is it adapting and evolving in with the face of AI and this sort of digital disruption that's going everywhere, particularly in the live entertainment space? Are you seeing that? Are you looking at what's coming down in terms of what's on your horizon, what's on the roadmap, and how is AI sort of impacting your world at the moment, Tracy?
I think there's, been some AI enhancements that marketing and communicators have had, within software and programming. So it's now, in a space where I think a lot of people are testing it out and seeing like, where does it apply? How can we use it to our advantage? Especially, seeing that in that digital space in the software and creating journeys, right, the customer journeys. I think it's going to be extremely helpful. There's also the use of video and photography. If anyone who's lived in the world of having to tag photos and categorize them, it's a lot of work. And now with some of the technology and using some of the AI components for face recognitions, and how can we better categorize that, which we would call some of the historical content that we do have, right, and that we want to preserve. And so I think it's an exciting time to be just part of that process, right, to see what's working and what's not. I do believe, from a media perspective, I I do believe in our all the great work that our media does for us. I still, think there's a space, where people are listening to their local morning shows on their, drive into work. They're turning on the TV to see what the weather reports are, what are the traffic, what's going on in the community. So we've always received tremendous, support from just like the mass media at large in what we do. And the media has always been integral in telling our stories, with of what we're doing across the board. And, whatever industry I've been part of throughout my career, they've always, been there to tell those stories and get the message out to the communities that we serve.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like AI is helping as a tool. It's shortening maybe some of the heavy lifting work that needs to be done, but obviously there's still the traditional things that people are still connected to, right? So it's maybe a
Mhm.
world of both things now.
Right. Yeah, a good balance, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, finally, your work, it seems to um, span obviously business, it spans entertainment, sports, education. Have you any sort of parting thoughts or any advice you could share with our global audience, whether they're in sports or business or entertainment? What can you leave us with, Tracy?
I would have to say, Simon, that it's the relationships that really matter. It's the human connection and engaging with people, learning about their businesses, how you can be there to support one another in a community. Because as again, no matter where your community is, we all can rise together in those successes of building a place where people they want to live, and they want to continue raising families, and in a place that they feel like it's home, right? So the relationships definitely matter, and whether it's the mentorship and working with internal and external teams within an organization.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I really like that. And what I also like, a common thread that's come through our discussion today is this, even with all the technology, even with all the um, busy world that you're involved in, that human connection
Hmm.
continues through, and it's such an important thread. But I want to thank you anyway, Tracy, for all the great insights you've given us and a little look into your world. It's been truly fascinating, and it brings me nicely to the end of this episode of Vista Talks. I want to ask everybody who's watching or listening to this around the world to tune in again to see and or listen to the next Vista Talks show, where again we'll be discussing more interesting topics with interesting people from all around the world, just like Tracy. But Tracy, thanks for being a guest on the show. It's been wonderful to talk to you today.
Well, thank you for having me.